Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
You need to have a longer term vision of how to use it in the ecosystem, and that it's valuable from a use case perspective, that it's integratable into the business from an ecosystem perspective, but that you can learn quickly from innovation perspective.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Hey folks, welcome back to Convergence.fm. Our guest today is Tommy Högström. He's a Swedish entrepreneur and an artificial intelligence strategist who's helped companies like McDonald's, H&M, and Spotify put AI to work in the real world. He founded a company called Apply, A-P-P-L-A-I, an AI consulting and product development firm all the way back in 2017. After working with some of Sweden's most notable brands on AI initiatives, he made the hard decision to sell his shares in the business and join their customer, Spotify. He also moved to New York City from Sweden. When he was at Spotify, Tommy helped lead financial forecasting and recommendation systems that powered billions of streams and informed company-wide strategic decisions rooted in data. Now he's a founding partner at Endorian Capital. Tommy and his partner Marcus are raising capital to acquire and then lead a software-enabled business. Their plan is to bring their experience in AI, data infrastructure, and commercial strategy to grow a company from the inside rather than being consultants. On the episode, we explore what real-world AI implementation actually takes, from aligning incentives between product and finance to building data pipelines that actually scale, and then ultimately separating the hype from real strategy. If you're a CEO, a founder, or an operator trying to figure out where AI fits into your business, this conversation has a ton of real-life examples that can help you cut through the noise. Here's my conversation with Tommy Högström. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Tommy, I've been excited to chat with you here, and there's a number of topics we want to cover. And I think let's start with the company that you helped found in Sweden, Apply. And I understand it was an AI consultancy and started pretty early in as far as like the AI journey went and many years ago. So walk me through how the company came to being.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm super excited to be here and talk to you as well. So before starting that company, I was in more general IT tech consulting, implementing various types of systems for large corporations. We were working with Microsoft technology to implement that, and I saw Microsoft and other tools starting to use AI or sell AI to various companies, and I was curious about what that technology would do to the world of technology and take the old world of IT, where the systems are rule-based, into a world of function-based systems or algorithms that changes based on the input over time. It's a system that learns, right? So just on the side, on the evenings and weekends, I started learning some of these AI tools, first more for fun, and then started shaping some new services for some big companies in Sweden, sold that, and then focused a lot of our focus on consumer intelligence and analyzing customer behavior and customer feedback to start with. So it's kind of early stages of large language models or language models in general, to understand if I have text and social media from 30,000 individuals, how can I analyze that at scale, understanding how to develop the product based on the feedback of the clients, but from free text and that type of file data instead of tabular, more structured data. So yeah, I did that, got some success in selling those services. And then I went back and talked to the people that were in the larger consulting organization that I was in before, talked to them about potentially creating a new company and get financing for the company from them. I got a lot of good support there in how to set up that company. I was pretty junior at the time. So got a lot of support both financially and structurally to set up the company. And then it was a lot of learning and running around, hiring fantastic people in the upcoming 3-4 years after that.
And you got to work with some pretty notable clients along the way there too.
Yeah, we like after all this work, we were super happy to be able to work with Spotify and H&M, McDonald's. And then for the people that knows companies in Sweden, it would be the equivalent of Netflix, which is Viaplay. We have Systembolaget, which is the monopoly of alcohol in Sweden, which have stores across the country, and a bunch of other transportation companies. So a lot of focus on taking all the different pieces of customer and consumer data that they have distributed in different sources. Could be transactions from a point of sale system, support, web data, consolidate that into one platform that is easier to use, and then building prediction systems that could predict what customers needed, when they needed it, how to communicate, and also optimize product development and offering development. It's kind of a new age data-driven product development, if you so will.
Awesome. And in that, I mean, it's something that I've been approached about a number of times at Integral, where folks, more or less, folks in the MBA or finance side, not necessarily as much on the technology and consulting side, would kind of talk about, hey, you know what you should do with your services business is you should turn it into a product business. And I think for different reasons, the services made a lot more sense for us. And I know that's a journey you had to cross as well at Apply. So talk to me about how that came about and maybe how it went.
Yeah. So the business was started as a service company, and the goal was always to build products that we can sell more on a subscription basis. But when you build a business around services, you build like the P&L statement, the organization of how to sell, how to collaborate in a different way than you would in a product organization. So luckily we were a small organization, so we could be quite flexible. But if you are evaluated each quarter on the money you make as a service company and the profit you make as a consulting company, and maybe me as the CEO getting bonuses on the money we make short term, it is a bit harder to build value on the balance sheet, which a product is, for future looking revenue and recurrence, right? So those two incentives are kind of clashing between the short term consulting service revenue and building value on the balance sheet for the product to be have stabilized revenue for the future. So that was something that we were struggling with when we had a lot of consulting engagements that we did great work for, we enjoyed, and we got good money for, which made the company profitable in many ways. But that also made sure that we had 8 to 12 hours a day that we had to perform consulting services, and then you're building products on top of that and selling them and testing them and implementing them with various clients. So that's one challenge. So I think in the future, I would separate that into two entities. I wouldn't have the same people working on the consulting part and the products. Maybe if the consulting or service part is very, very tightly connected to the implementation and development of one specific product, not if it's services that are a bit more broad in building data platforms and software systems for these clients in general. The second one was how you run a product company is very different from a valuation standpoint as well. Service company and a product company are valuated differently. So if you don't have a governance and ownership structure and valuation structure from the board and from the owners that aligns with that transition, there is going to be friction in how the company is run, and who can sell the company to what valuation in the future, alongside the incentives of short-term profitability versus building long-term value on the balance sheet. So those were two challenges that in the end led to the decision to move on from there.
And that's got to be a hard decision outside of the stuff that you can put on a spreadsheet or you can kind of teach as a lecturer. I imagine in terms of the emotional components, if this is something you built from scratch, it probably has your DNA and a lot of the branding and the culture. And it sounds like you chose to sell those shares and walk away and join one of your customers. So talk to me if there's any kind of additional points to that were hard to overcome.
Yeah, I would say two different things. One is, as everyone says in building any type of project or business, that it feels like you're very emotionally connected to it because you sat down and with a blank sheet of paper and just started thinking about the offering, the name, the logo, the colors, what type of clients you're supposed to have. You went through all the blood, sweat, and tears of reaching these clients. 99% of them didn't even answer you in the start, right? Like it takes 1,000 discussions to get to a couple of business opportunities in the future in a world where AI is kind of new as it was 8 years ago, right? So yeah, I think from that perspective, it was challenging, but in the end, it just pushes through a limit where you think it's worth taking the next step. Yeah, I think that's the main component. Like you just build everything from scratch, and obviously it's going to be sad to move on. But I think the second one would be you have yourself as an entrepreneur such a strong mindset in I am going to succeed with this. You have a strong vision because otherwise you wouldn't be able to push through. You have this strong vision. You have a belief in yourself, the business, and the people you work with that is not statistically proven in any way, because on average companies wouldn't succeed in the way that you think you will, right? So when people ask me, why do you keep starting like projects or companies? And then I say, I'm stupid enough to think that I can. And then you do until you succeed or don't, right? So I think that was also something that I had to kind of just get over, that, okay, I reached a certain level of success, but now it's time for me to move on to something else, instead of staying in that and being stubborn to push through in a direction that I logically didn't believe that the business will like reach or go in that direction.
It seems like a very calculated approach, but also really taking into consideration kind of what fires you up internally. And I know that now you've kind of moved on from joining that client to joining a search fund. So I imagine a lot of the audience may not be familiar with the search fund. So maybe help us understand what that is. But more importantly, I want to hear how you decided to go about that and go back into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So in general, I think my passion, my way of working works better in an entrepreneurial kind of situation. In this case, Spotify in general is a innovative and kind of entrepreneurial company. Now it's really big, so things have changed. But in general, it was a kind of a soft move over there. If I were to move to a big bank, for example, I think it would have been a bigger shift in mindset. But yeah, that was great working at Spotify with fantastic people. I was very blessed to work with geniuses at Spotify. Great people, but also with great skills. But getting to Endurion Capital and founding this search fund, actually a good friend of mine called me 5-6 years ago when he heard about this model of search funding. And he said, I found this model called the search fund where you go out, you raise some capital from investors, and then you go out and you spend some time finding entrepreneurs and companies that are open to selling their business that is already working, being profitable, but they, for different reasons, want to exit their business. Maybe it's because of age or something else. And then you can acquire that business, step in as CEO, take over and set an updated vision, invest in that company to scale and grow, and do that for X amount of years going forward. So when he called me, it sounded like a model that was kind of too good to be true, because it's a mix between entrepreneurship, where you take a business that already reached a product market fit, but then you get to innovate and scale on top of it. But at the same time, you get the financial leverage of bringing in investments and great collaborators and great minds to support you in that journey of scaling that business. So it was a mix between using business development and in our situation, background in AI data platforms and tech development, together with the financial leverage that comes from the private equity world. So for both my passion, my time in life, and the leverage of my skill sets and network, it felt like the best balance. It was the best risk adjusted, together with the passion that we're looking for, me and my business partner.
Awesome. And finding a co-founder is, from an investment standpoint, certainly something that is super beneficial. And most investors prefer to invest in kind of groups of founders versus solo founders. At the same time, when you are the founder, and you have been before, and you've had kind of either partners on the founding table or on your cap table as investors, you know that carries a lot of maybe debt or risk. And I'm curious what the thought process was for you to collaborate with your partner.
Yeah, so I totally agree. It's one of the most important components in the success of any, especially startup or early stage companies, right? In this case, me and Marcus, we've had the privilege of knowing each other for 18 years. So we have known each other personally and professionally for a long time. So we know how we get along personally, but also how we kind of complement each other on a skill set level. So very happy that we had that luck, so to speak. Yeah, it's been great working with him, and I think that we will continue to do great work together. But to your point, it's such an important component to have the right both team with you, but also founder. And something that I learned founding Apply 8 years ago, and going through the struggles of finding product and offering market fit and hiring people, getting both yeses and nos in the sales, is that I told myself I'm never gonna start a company by myself again. It's not gonna happen. You need to take all the hits yourself, and you can't celebrate on the same level as you would do if you're on the same boat with someone. You can still celebrate with people in the organization or part of the owners, but they're never gonna have the same stake in the game as you do. So I would suggest to anyone that wants to start a business or buy a business to really focus on finding the right partner to do so.
I'm going to add maybe a little bit of an addendum, maybe even some pushback here, okay? Because you and I I agree with you that we have in common that I think if I'm going to do another business venture, it's certainly going to have partners from day one. And these are kind of not just investors, but co-founders. And I think there's a lot more benefits from that that I'll certainly agree with you. In my case, though, I think doing it the first time by myself and being kind of the one person there also helped me a lot on a personal level. I think from an accountability standpoint and other pieces, when there's no one else to kind of look at, it forced me to kind of look within, and it helped me understand a lot more about some of my strengths that I bring to the table that I can double down and leverage on, as well as some kind of weaknesses that I was overlooking. And sometimes, in my case, literally, like it's laying on the kitchen floor crying by yourself. You have to get up at some point and fix it. I learned a lot about it. And I'm curious, if you have any thing that you've noticed about yourself that way, about a first-time founder versus a second time. And, if you were to look back, do you wish you had a co-founder, or do you think that you benefited from kind of being the solo founder for Apply?
That's a great question. And Absolute the biggest takeaway is the learning of yourself, and this all the struggles teach you something, right? Teach you something about yourself, but it also forces you to teach yourself skill sets that you wouldn't need to teach yourself if you had a partner that weighed up those skill sets. So for example, now working with Marcus, we know that I can take things that I'm better at, and I most certainly he does a lot of stuff that I don't have the skill set to do. But if you're by yourself, you have to at least try to learn it. Sometimes you fail and sometimes you succeed, but you're going to have to push yourself harder. You're going to learn more about yourself as well. So optimizing for learning, totally agree. Optimizing for success, short term, then probably it's better to be a team. But as you were alluding to, and as we've seen in statistics, most people don't succeed in their first time. They use that as a training wheel for future ventures. That is not something that goes on in an entrepreneur's brain when they start the first thing, right? You don't start a company and say, oh, let me fail with this one fast, I can fail with two more, and then I'll succeed with the fourth. That's not how our minds work, but in reality, that's usually how it is. So to your question on looking back into the mirror, I probably wouldn't have changed how I did it. It just taught me how I want to do it going forward.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned the geniuses at Spotify, and in the world that we work, certainly on the one hand, it's a beautiful, delightful product for many of us, and then also there's a lot to learn if you really look at how Spotify grew as a business. On the flip side, there's also you may have heard of the Scale to Agile framework, which was starting to get a little dated. And then the Spotify model became kind of the next iteration of like maybe a model for enterprise companies to aspire to move fast at scale. And similar to SAFe, I would say a lot of it leads to inefficiencies and more problems than people just figuring it out themselves. And I would say this about SAFe, where the company where SAFe was invented got a lot of benefit because they had some first principles and a destination outside of ending up at SAFe. They had a real business to build, and SAFe happened to be the way that dovetailed best into building the business. And I think it's similar to the Spotify model there, where Spotify had a real business to build. And then, if you read the white paper on scaling agility at Spotify by the two gentlemen there and stuff, a lot of folks are trying to kind of copy and paste the final state versus take the journey. And so that's kind of my double-ended kind of gripe or double-edged gripe about the Spotify model. But you've gotten to see it from the inside. And I imagine there would have been some like shocking or surprising moments when you first even started consulting with them about how they truly were running this business with a different culture and different operating model. And so if you can try and remember what it was like to first kind of get exposed to Spotify and serve them as a consultant, what was that like?
Yeah, it's a big question and interesting angle. So I think there definitely, or have been traditionally, I think that's shifting a bit, but growing up as a company, definitely been very distributed in the ownership of various parts of the product. So almost like every team have their own product manager and engineering manager with a team of 4 to 7 engineers of different sorts, or data scientists, depending on what you build, that together have a part of the product, internally or externally, that they own, create a mission and vision for the team, for the product, and that kind of grows and changes over time. So that means that you can innovate fast, you can test things fast, you can find new ways of doing things. And it also means that when you give that power to distributed teams across the company, that there will be teams doing the same or similar things over time. And there will be built in different tools across the company. And over time, that if you do not consolidate how people build stuff and where and how they integrate, it is going to build tech debt as well. That over time is going to push innovation and creativity and attract great people and culture. But it also is going to create some of those inefficiencies that you were mentioning in terms of what to focus on, and on the technology side, efficiency in development and tech debt initiatives that are huge to kind of consolidate some of the platforms across the company. So I think for me, it's more a matter of what's the focus of the company at the time that affects what kind of culture you want to drive. The focus of the company for 17 years was purely to focus on getting more and more users. We built financial data sets and systems to try to keep it on a leash on the financial side, obviously, but the absolute biggest objective was to get more users. At some point, and that works in a world where money is kind of cheap in the VC world, right? But at some point, management or the ownership decides that we need to become profitable. We need to think about the financials, not only on the side, but as a first objective of the company. So when that happens, a company, and Spotify as well, thinks about how do we become more efficient in the things that I just mentioned? How do we have less overlap over teams? How do we have clearer priorities? Because now we have found what works and what doesn't work. And then you start streamlining the platform, the people, the focuses, the objectives. And that's why it's kind of a balance between when you create too much structure, and you can even call it suffocation of innovation, then you are going to get less innovative features over time. You will attract other type of people over time, and it might affect your future. But at the same time, I don't think that Spotify shouldn't have made those changes at the stage of company that they are. So for me, it's a very thin balance of how to focus your objectives on profitability and financials, or on 100% customer delight and growth.
Would you say that the culture kind of remained similar and then they had to go out and execute that culture differently? Or did the kind of underlying culture also have to change as the sands changed?
I would say it's almost the opposite. It's the objectives and the structure that changes the culture versus the culture change that changes the structure and the objectives. So in a world where profitability is more important than innovation, that means that people are, and then if you slice the organization for different reasons, people with ideas or innovation are not going to focus on that. They're going to focus on the profitability piece that they are directed to focus on. And that in turn drives culture of what is it okay for me as a person or organization to do and talk about and focus on. So it's a combination of kind of those objectives with the priority and what is focused on the highest of key metrics of the company. So I would say it's rather the directives that trickles down into culture. And if you don't do that in a very smooth way, you are going to change your culture, especially in a company like Spotify.
One thing that I think the industry will generally agree upon in terms of Spotify as a product is that there's like, even at scale, even after I think that inflection point in terms of the cost of capital, there continue to be these really surprisingly delightful things that Spotify is able to bring out. Beyond kind of the initial personalized playlists and stuff, there's still like social features where you can build collaborative playlists as a couple or as a friend circle. There's switching between your devices, things that once you're on Spotify, like it's hard to think about going back to one of the other ones. And you're thinking about starting a company that's already a product market fit. And so, scaling is going to be a big part of what you bring as a value add to the company you acquire as a search fund. And I'm curious, and in your case, you have a co-founder and partner. So you probably have to bring Marcus up to speed on a few things around how Spotify did this at scale. So what are some things that you're excited to bring forward to the company that you acquire? And what do you think the top things are that you'd have to teach your leadership team or your co-founder about what you learned there?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is that the culture and ways of working in Spotify doesn't suit all organizations, and it might not suit the company that we go in and acquire either. It depends so much on the type of company that we end up stepping into. So if you, for example, if we generalize things, if you go into a B2B service company, like a tech-enabled service company or a vertical SaaS company or a hardware company that builds software on top of that hardware, it's going to be very different in terms of what culture you need to scale that business. But what me and Marcus talk a lot about is how would we be able to bring best practices in both software development that tracks the right data so that you can optimize whatever prediction systems you need to build in your platform to kind of scale it and create new business models. How do you do that, and what cultures do you need? What type of people do you need to scale that type of business? So a lot of businesses nowadays are, even if it's a service business or as a IoT like device business, or if it's a software business, all of those interactions create some type of data, right? If you have a software company, you're going to integrate with a bunch of other platforms. You're going to have people using your software, which in turn creates new data, which will then either support the use cases of predicting a behavior or it won't. So how you store and integrate that data will be important whether you run a software company. Same as for the hardware. You're going to have a hardware or device that's through telematics store that data in a platform. So what data you track at what velocity, at what quality, into what system, will also depend how you will be able to step into the new world of LLMs and AI into the future. And the same with the service company, because if you perform, just for simplicity, if you perform like an accounting type of service, or let's say you do maintenance, you go out and you do a service to maintain machines. In all those interactions, data is created. And if you're not tracking it in the right way, you're not going to be able to build a data asset or a data asset that you can then use to improve your processes, right? Traditionally, you measure something, you put a KPI, you look at the KPI and you say, oh, did we do good or bad? How do we understand where to go? And then you strategically shift every quarter, every year. But nowadays, since you get more and more velocity and speed of this data, you can both look at the KPIs in real time, but you can also use that data to predict the future and then make strategic decisions based on that. So that whole ecosystem is something that me and Marcus are looking forward to supporting an organization with, everywhere from standardizing and scaling the traditional sales and marketing operations through to scaling the commercial model and the product model using the data to scale the business in new business models as well.
And then with respect to your role specifically at Spotify, what were you working on bringing all this AI ML expertise?
Yeah, so we were working in the financial engineering space, and the products that me and my teams were building was both prediction systems of some key financial metrics, but also the data platform to have the financial insight of when we build the product and change the product, what is going to be the financial impact of that. So let's say, for example, you want to understand if you do more marketing in a certain way in a certain market, or you change the recommendation system to give more recommendation for music type A or B or podcast, how is that going to affect you financially? So if you have 600 million users on the platform, and each of these stream content, music, podcasts, and so forth, every time something is streamed more than 30 seconds, it triggers a royalty system, because Spotify pays a lot of money in royalties to the people that contribute to the platform in terms of content. So billions and billions of streams happens all the time. And the company needs to understand, based on the shifts in the recommendation system, on the content that you push out to the consumer, what financial impact will that have? So those were the kind of tools that we were building. We're building a scenario analysis tool. We're building financial data sets so that the company could understand, with the strategic shifts, if you do an A/B test in the product before you roll out the new feature, for example, you want to understand both how that's going to affect the usage and consumption, but you also want to understand how that flows down to the full P&L, because that P&L on the actual side needs to go out to Wall Street, but also the forecast over the upcoming 2 years also need to go out to Wall Street. And that is kind of a balance between how do you enable a product to really delight the consumer or the customer, while also optimizing for the financial structure of this huge system.
And I think this is such a critical part, and it's no surprise that you're in this kind of investor space now, because I think that analysis and having some level of predictability on the outcome is so critical. If there are listeners out there wanting to learn more about developing that skill, maybe it's a product manager that wants to swim upstream, maybe it's an investor that wants to kind of work closer on the product side, where would you point them to?
So if you're a business person or a product manager and want to learn more about the financial side or the prediction and AI side?
Yeah, let me rephrase that. I think, when we do product discovery today, a big gap right now is between how the product discovery research ties back to kind of projected business metrics, whether it's usage, consumption, revenue, maybe even profitability and other things. And I think not having clarity on that picture is a reason why folks don't do anything. And in our world, we usually would consult with them and help them invest incrementally to start creating, maybe it's customer research that's very manual, that's very cheap and fast. And then that informs the next kind of tranche or magnitude of investment that allows us to then continue to learn more. And if the company can be pretty disciplined about not forgetting about the feedback loops, then you can make pretty informed decisions. And that's the system that we developed ourselves or with our customers. And I'm curious, sitting from your lens, if there's someone out there that wants to learn how to kind of bridge things like product discovery or product data analysis and wants to use that to model financials, where do you go learn that? Or who do you follow for that kind of stuff?
Oh, wow. The short answer is I don't know. We have frameworks, and I've thought a lot about like how to break down various objectives of a business into a data problem, because I think that's usually where the problem is. You have different people understanding the data than understanding the objectives of the business, and the people understanding the objectives of the business is not clear enough breaking that down into the people running the processes and then generating the data, structuring the data, to be able to build up to whatever use case you're looking for. So that's usually where I start when I work with businesses, and I work with everywhere from the CEO down to the amazing people building the systems and the data pipelines. So I think that process is the absolute most critical one to be able to work in a, as everyone says, kind of a data-driven way. But in terms of sources, I'm a bad person to ask. I just dig into it and try to figure it out.
Yeah, I think figuring it out back from the fundamentals and then adding sophistication second is
Yeah,
probably like the takeaway that I have from there, that we use very similar principle as
yeah,
opposed to trying to copy some kind of very sophisticated model and not knowing the underlying Jenga puzzle, but
yeah,
using it to try and make some really big bets. So I think it's a very good answer.
yeah. And I think I even at Spotify, I kept like using some of the product development models there, Googled and researched a bunch of models. I think it's good to have a high level understanding of them, but then you just need to, based on the specific situation that you have, adapt it and not try to be too rigid in what model you use. I think if you're just starting out in product management, yes, try to use a model or two and try to force it through, but you will learn that you will have to adapt it to the situation over time, because otherwise you're gonna force things into a model instead of adapting the model to the situation, which usually is more beneficial.
And speaking of models, and there's been a lot of maturity in the industry around
Mm.
artificial intelligence since you and I first got involved in it. And you mentioned back then that you learned a bunch of AI tools in the weekend, and now the tools are so much more sophisticated and moving so much faster. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're learning on the weekend, or people totally should be learning on the weekend today?
Today, wow, I don't have any extra time in the weekend to learn any new tools right now. I'm head over heels in working with finding the right business and analyzing it. But if I just take one step back first to 8 years ago, I remember kind of the first tool that I dug into was called Gava Guy, and it was a user interface, as a business person, very simple tool to use, where you ingested thousands of text data, and then you tried to model in applications. You configured various topics and sentiments in there to be able to analyze those texts. So that was my way of trying to understand, analyzing text at the time, what were the capabilities of them. So I think that's one of the main things to try any type of tool. If you just Google whatever use case you have, you want to do customer insights on text, or if you want to do AI calls, whatever you want to, whatever use case it is, and you Google the top tools, just play around in them. That will make you understand what's the level of maturity of this type of technology right now. And then you can start thinking about, is this good enough for the use case that I'm trying to solve it for? But it's always going to come out from, because I get that question quite a lot, right? Where do you read up on AI, or what are the best tools? But the boring answer is that it all depends on the use case and the situation. And use cases of AI, one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, what is the cost of being wrong? So in a product recommendation system, being wrong with what product I recommend to you, the cost is somewhat low, unless I recommend something inappropriate, depending on the group that you're recommending it to. But if you're in healthcare, cost of being wrong is really freaking high. So the accuracy needs to be way different. The platform needs to be way different. The data governance and controls need to be way different. So I think whatever you're trying to learn, I think just take a step back and understand like what would be the purpose of doing that. And then you'll either use ChatGPT to find the tool, depending on what you need, or Google around, because now it's way too many tools out there anyway. So I think that's going to be my boring but truthful answer, that it all depends what you're trying to learn, and then just dig into it. And then if I go back again to the 8 years back, after I sat and learned this kind of simple to use configurable tool, and then starting to hire people that were way smarter than me within data science, and they have machine learning degrees at the time. Then we started to build transformers or language models from scratch. And with the algorithms or transformers that were available at the time, it was very hard, but it was not too much because of the algorithms, to be honest. It was more because of the data was usually crap. It's a balance between like what level of quality does the algorithm need from the data versus what quality of data enables a certain algorithm. So building algorithms in general is quite easy if you have a perfect data set. The problem is that you rarely have a perfect data set, right? So that's why it's always going to be a balance. And one of the reasons why you most likely won't have a perfect data set is because the data is created by people or processes in a business. So if it's sales data, it's a salesperson filling things into the CRM. I've been there myself. You don't always fill in the same format. There are tables that miss certain data. It could be wrong. It's systems that have data across 3 different systems. When you consolidate them, something doesn't add up. So that's why there are so many people, and I learned also 8 years ago that for every data scientist to build an algorithm that you usually need 4 data engineers to be able to build that platform and really incorporate the data that you need to be able to build those systems. What's changed now is that these wide LLM models have a wider concept that they can support with, given that they understand language and they're wider and bigger in many ways. But when it's in an actual business, it's more about finding the specific model or algorithm or use case rather than having a wide, large model. In most of the business cases, AI is more finding the right data, the right system for the use case, rather than having a system that solves it all.
So I really like the cost of being wrong piece. And we have a very similar workshop that we run as consultants, which is the cost of finding out. And I think folks are sometimes over-investing or under-investing. And the finding out piece, really we use to help them marry the level of investment to the level of validation that the idea has. Sometimes they're under-investing because of certain fears, and doing a really low risk, low cost, quick experiment to go find out whatever the critical part of what they're afraid of to move forward can be really helpful. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, but either way, you can stop deliberating and you can either decide to prioritize it up or out. And then the other side, where folks are over-investing, we try and find the critical assumption in the innovation compared to whoever they're trying to beat out in terms of how the customer is solving that problem and how the market's solving that today, and try and see if their new way is really going to steal market share from the current way of doing things or not. And in both cases, help kind of our clients with informing the early, quick, and fast innovation experiments so that you can get started to build momentum and realize that there's a lot of data along the way that can be more valuable than maybe the initial revenue, the initial profitability in the short term. And then something else that I love that you mentioned is that ratio of data engineers to data scientists. I think it's something that we've all found out the hard way, where we have maybe prioritized the algorithm and assuming that the data is very usable. And then when we start to look at the algorithm's outputs and eventually find the root cause, we realize that the data hasn't been normalized or the quality isn't quite at a point that the algorithm can accommodate for. And I'm curious, I know that you're called upon by various boards and as a consultant around your expertise on the AI space. And are there any other top items that folks seem to keep getting wrong consistently, or big myths that you're having to dispel as you're doing your consulting work?
Yeah, I honestly would say that the biggest one is that there are companies that look at it as an IT technology piece rather than a fundamental shift in how you think about the business model and people and the business as an ecosystem. So why I'm saying that is that everyone knows that, like, okay, you can't build AI without various types of data, right? But at the same time, like, data is the most cross-functional asset that a company has, because data is created in all the processes. Data is created when you manufacture, when you sell, when you market, when you do accounting, in HR, everywhere you create data. So if you have a business strategy that is, I want to grow in a certain segment, I want to be more effective in my marketing, I want to be able to manufacture more effectively, you are going to have to fundamentally shift how you think about your processes, because they don't only output sales, marketing, or products, they also output data that then will help you improve that process going forward, so you're more effective in whatever you want to do. And having people think about it as an ecosystem rather than something external or additional as an IT system. And we've already made that kind of transition in our way of thinking with IT in general as well, right? If we look at 10, maybe 20 years back, companies treated technology as an IT function. IT function was a cost function, and then you had sales and marketing as a revenue function. Nowadays, a lot of companies have started to shift that to say, okay, technology is a part of everything that we do to enable us to fulfill our strategy with the business. It's rare that when we think about an IT organization that is only a cost function, we think about a more old school type of business, right? And that's the transition that AI needs to go through as well, where the whole organization, all the IT systems, all the people create data that then will go into the AI systems that you want to fuel back into the machine of your business. So I think that's the absolute key thing that I think is still up for transformation in how entrepreneurs and businesses are run, to think about it being a core part of everything rather than an external innovation aspect or an old type of IT system.
This brings up a really interesting conundrum for me. It's interesting to me anyway, because I haven't been able to solve it in some capacity. And on the one hand, I agree with you completely. All right. Like, I think I've worked in the manufacturing sector in IoT and have had to kind of figure out how to get data off of like plant floor controllers and PLCs. And the electrical engineer who wrote that code did not think by any means that someone later would be trying to pull data off of it. And then I moved from there to working in the automotive industry and working on sort of CAN bus. And it was almost the same exact thing where, the ABS or the all-wheel drive would all work perfectly. But if you tried to look at the code inside that ran it and tried to extract some kind of metadata or insights, it was just really hard because, again, we didn't write the code back then like we do today, where we anticipate someone's going to want to read the data and the tags we use and other components, and making it easy for that third person to understand is really critical. So I totally agree with you that thinking about your business as one that generates data, thinking about your business as one that uses data, and then putting in that extra investment today of making sure that it's going to be easy for you tomorrow to read the data that you're creating advertently or inadvertently, I think is something that's worth putting an extra 10, 20% of investment into, and will reduce the debt in the long term. So that's one piece that I'd say that I agree with you, and hopefully I'm not mischaracterizing your point there too much. On the flip side, whether it was on mobile, whether it was on cloud, and now in AI, we've experienced a number of folks who are doing like development and, what they call innovation without much of a business sense to it. So they're building AI for the sake of AI. And I live in Detroit, and we've seen a number of investments go into autonomous vehicle development, where there was a lot of AI for the sake of AI, and then forgetting the critical path of like, hey, if the car can't drive itself, all the other AI stuff doesn't really matter in the context of the business case working. So I'm curious, what's the 2x2 maybe, since you've worked in management consulting, or, what's that place where, yes, we got to change the way we fundamentally think about data, but also how do we avoid folks from like building this technology for the sake of technology that doesn't actually serve something in their business?
Yeah. And I think those two tie well in together, and to the process that I was talking about before, because it always goes into the business use case of what you're trying to solve for. So as long as you do that, you won't build technologies just for the sake of it. And to your other point before, where you want to be able to test things out and what's the cost of figuring out, you could also think that that would be, if you do that too much, that you would innovate on the side, but at the same time, you need to think about how to use it long term. So it's like a combination of thinking about the use case and the processes and the ecosystem. Start small to figure out quickly, but you need to have a longer term vision of how to use it in the ecosystem. So it's kind of that constant balance between the short term and the long term, where you need to understand that it's valuable from a use case perspective, that it's integratable into the business from an ecosystem perspective, but that you can learn quickly from innovation perspective. But I've also seen a bunch of projects where you build some sort of prediction on the side with some perfect data that you exported one time, you refined it, and then you're going to try to roll out this prediction system out in the organization. And then you figure out that it's not scalable to get this data. We can't batch this data every 30 days and then try to manually fix it. It needs to be running smoothly over time, and the systems needs to be rebuilt or integrated and cleaned at the point of data creation. Mm-hmm. So if you're like in web, for example, and you're using amplitude to measure different events of knowing when a consumer click on a certain button on the website, that needs to be tracked there. It can't be just exported out before it's tracked and then you manually fix the data set and create an AI system or a prediction system. It needs to be fixed in the system because it is food for the organism to live off when it's scaled out into the business. I think those kind of components together, you need to be quick and innovative and learning and failing quickly while thinking about how it integrates into the ecosystem, while thinking about the business value and the objectives of the business at the same time.
I love that. Hey, some things as we wrap up, I'd like to get to know. Another thing that we have in common is that we both, for the most part, grew up overseas and then moved to North America in our adult years. And, I've got literal stand-up comedy sets that have documented some of my biggest observations. And I think you've done it within the company, right? You were at Spotify in Sweden, and then you moved to Spotify here. And then as you branch away from Spotify, you're doing entrepreneurship in a different country. And I'm curious, what are some of the biggest things that you might find yourself telling your cousins or your friends back home about how things are different here?
Yeah, that's a funny question. And obviously the States is a big country with different cultures, but I'll compare with New York specifically, since that's where I moved over to. And the culture in Sweden is that you should not stand out in any way. It's not to say that like people tell you on the streets that you shouldn't, but all the different social cues are to not stand out professionally, how you are, how you look, right? In New York, on the other hand, if I were to wear like a super stupid jacket that looks really weird, people will tell you, that's a real cool jacket, do your thing. And that's just like underlying difference of swing for the fences, do your thing, rather than blend in, don't stand out. There's positive and negative things with both. I do love the many things of the Swedish culture, of inclusiveness, the part of socialism that enables everyone to start new companies and innovate because there's a social net to save you if you swing for the fences and it goes wrong. In the United States, it's swing for the fences in another way because you have a huge market, you have people and a culture that enables you to swing for the fences from a cultural standpoint. So it's two very different swing for the fences part of the culture that I really learned to understand in the past 3-4 years.
Interesting. That's wonderful. So what I'm hearing is that, the Patagonia vests in finance, that's kind of a uniform. That's a little bit more like how things were in Sweden. And then like the very counterculture Gen Z type of attire is maybe like more accepted in New York than it might be back there.
Yeah, so like people dress nicely in Sweden. People are super nice, so it's nothing wrong with that. People the same way of being and not standing out. It's just a part of entrepreneurship is to stand out and to think differently. So the social security of Sweden enables entrepreneurship and the early adoption of internet back in the days. But the culture, I think, is more positive in the States for swinging for the fences as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd never thought about how maybe Spotify might be even more counterculture than given the environment around there to swing so big, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing why it's positive in Sweden for scale, like Spotify and Skype and SoundCloud and Volvo and H&M, like all these companies, IKEA, you need to think globally from day one, right? Like there are very few businesses of that type of business that you can make successful within Sweden because it's 10 million people, right? So the combination of that mindset together with technological enhancement, because digitally, I haven't seen any other country that is more advanced than Sweden, and just like handling the IRS or banks, simple stuff like that. And that enables people to think in terms of technology and scalability quite quickly, which has made Sweden a good country per capita, at least, in scaling companies globally.
Yeah, so presumably now you're going to be successful with your search fund, you're going to find a business, and as part of having a new vision, there's going to be some cultural tweaks, some team tweaks that yourself and Marcus are going to put into the company. And I'm curious, when you think about a team, is there like a North Star or some kind of inspiration that you feel like you're going to try and pull this new team's dynamic and culture and organization towards?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's going to be one of the big focuses coming into the business, to make sure that we have a culture for success going forward. I would say actually, like, the first consulting company that I started working for is called Exigo in the tech space. The culture there was very entrepreneurial driven. It was still a consulting company, very professional with big clients, but internally it was very oriented around building new business models. If you had an idea, you got support from senior people. You had a wide partnership structure of both ownership and running the business. It's very different from like a big corporate where your role is very structured. Like, this is what you're supposed to focus on. So I bring that entrepreneurial culture with me in enabling an ownership feeling for all people in the organization, and enable them to learn and try new things instead of penalizing for making mistakes. So I think that kind of open, innovative culture is something that I want to bring with me, and something that Exigo as a company kind of instilled that as a foundation of my career. So yeah, that would be my answer.
I think that's really smart. We had folks at Integral coming in as consultants from various places, and the fear of failing, I think, was the one thing that we had to put a disproportionate amount of effort in changing their minds. And that's likely because they came from an environment where the cost of failure was really high. And, the innovation was also really low in terms of a correlation there, most likely. And it took a while for us to really figure out the various nuts and bolts of convincing people that it's okay to do that here. You're not going to get yelled at. You're not going to get fired. And, if I had to guess the target demographic of companies that you're buying, it might be a very worthwhile thing to overinvest in, around kind of maybe a generational change in management style might be another way to think about it too, and kind of who's selling businesses and stuff. And the other question that we like to know about who those really engaged teams are serving and what they ship is the delightful product. So I'm curious if there's recently a product that you experienced, or a service that you experienced, or a product that you got to use or buy that really just blew your socks off. And, you can almost tell that the team that built it was really fired up and really gelling when they built it. And, you obviously can't say Spotify or any of the new Spotify features. You got to go outside of that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I would say, so I'm a person that have different passwords everywhere and keep forgetting them. So something that just like simplifies my life so much is just having all the passwords in one kind of web-based system or plugin. So I'm using one password, and wherever I log in, you just like have one password for that, and just like automatically populates. So it feels like sounds like a simple problem, but it's also a problem where it's super annoying and spend a lot of time doing. So yeah, from a frictionless side, I would say that's what kind of pops to mind.
I'm totally excited to hear that. Being from Toronto and 1Password having significant presence in Toronto, I know a bunch of people that work there. So similar to Spotify, maybe being for you as a Swede, as a Torontonian, 1Password is a matter of pride for us. So that's great to hear. And Tommy, so if there's folks who want to get a hold of you, either for learning more about this content and maybe having you consult to them, or maybe an entrepreneur out there that feels like you'd be a great person to take over their business from them, or perhaps investors that want to participate in your search fund, what is the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think the easiest thing is either LinkedIn or email. So LinkedIn, you'll find me at, or Tommy Högström. Actually, it's Högström in Swedish. So it's Tommy, and then it's Hogstrom. But the O's have 2 dots on it, which is a Swedish letter. And then email is just Tommy at endurioncapital.com.
Awesome. And we'll have links to that in the show notes as well. Hey, man, this was super educational and fun for me. Thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode with Tommy Högström. I think there is a ton for me to learn about it from this model around search funds. And while I've heard of it before, I think bringing a data and product lens approach to how you can increase the value of a company that you acquire is something that I don't believe enough firms are thinking about. Another one is around how culture and strategy impact each other, and how he talked about how Spotify changed their focus from growing users to then becoming profitable, and how that had a trickle-down effect where initially maybe standardization was not really needed, and it enabled their teams to be even more creative and innovative. And then as they wanted to switch from that growth and user acquisition to more of a profitability and efficiency mindset, how their culture also had to change, where they had to start thinking about consolidation, having maybe some more structure, shared services, and other efficiencies that can stifle innovation, but ultimately can help with creating sustainability so this business can last a lot longer versus burnout. I think Spotify, as many of us know, is a great example of a company that's been able to maintain their innovation and customer delight, despite being able to transition to being profitable and more efficient. And so I think there's a few things there for me that I'm really going to be keeping on thinking about as we help our companies and our customers with growing and scaling and doing the hard parts about bringing discipline and structure and efficiency, while also being innovative and maintaining customer delight. We will be back next week with another episode about how to foster engaged teams and ship delightful products. We'll see you here on convergence.fm. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.